There's something remarkable about a person who has suffered deeply and still chooses to feel. You can always tell there's a weight in their presence, a softness in their gaze, and a depth in their words that doesn't come from books or teachings. It comes from the raw experience of enduring what most people avoid. You've likely felt emotions so intense, so consuming, that they threaten to undo you completely. And yet you didn't run from them. You didn't numb them or bury them forever. Instead, you faced them. You let them break you open. You see, suffering doesn't just leave scars. It deepens the soul. It chisels away everything false and reveals something real beneath. And that's why you don't experience life at the surface. Eutomization, you feel the layers, you notice what others miss, you pause where others rush. You carry the kind of emotional depth that unnerves shallow minds because you're no longer afraid to feel pain, or beauty, or joy, or grief, all in the same breath. This isn't sentimentality. It's not about being dramatic. It's about being real. When someone has been to the bottom and found their way back, they don't trivialize the human experience anymore. They understand that behind every outburst is a wound. Behind every silence is a story. And behind every heart is a battle no one else can see. That awareness makes you more human, not less. Many people spend their whole lives trying to avoid sadness, avoid anger, avoid loneliness, believing these are signs of weakness. But you know better. You've learned the ability to feel fully is actually a mark of strength. You've built a relationship with your inner world. You've cried without shame. You've felt fear without paralysis. You've sat with despair long enough to understand that it too passes. And now you walk with a quiet grace, not because you're untouched by life, but because you've been touched so deeply. You've learned how to hold it all. You feel deeply because you've lived deeply. That's not a burden, it's a gift. And the world needs more people like you. There comes a time, often after immense pain, when silence begins to feel more truthful than words. It's not that you've given a pippon or that you become cold. It's that you've discovered something sacred in solitude. When you've endured deep suffering, the noise of the world no longer distracts you the way it used to. The parties, the chatter, the endless distractions, they feel hollow, and suddenly being alone doesn't feel lonely anymore. It feels like returning home. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes after countless moments of sitting with your own thoughts, your own grief, your own confusion. At first, solitude feels unbearable, but gradually, as you stop resisting it, it begins to reveal its wisdom. You realize that silence holds answers noise could never give. In solitude, you hear your soul speak, not with words, but with clarity. And once you've tasted that kind of inner stillness, you begin to crave it. People who have suffered deeply often develop this quiet preference for solitude, not because they hate the world, but because they've had to rebuild themselves in the dark alone. And in doing so, they've found something pure, an authenticity that doesn't rely on performance or validation. When you've sat through your own darkness and made peace with it, you stop chasing approval. You stop needing to be seen. You become more selective with your energy, more cautious with your time, and more reverent toward your peace. You begin to understand that not every space deserves your presence. Not every conversation needs your voice, and not Every connection is meant to last. You choose depth over distraction, presence over performance. You don't fear being alone, you fear being disconnected from yourself. This is one of the paradoxes of deep suffering. It isolates you, but in that isolation you often find your true self. And once you've met that version of yourself, the world can never pull you back into its noise in quite the same way. You may still engage, still connect, still love. But now you do so from a grounded place, a place that was forged in silence, shaped by solitude, and protected by inner truth. That's not withdrawal, it's wisdom. And it's a strength most will never understand. When someone has suffered deeply, they no longer look at others the same way. Their perception shifts. They begin to see beneath the surface, to feel things that are never said out loud. You walk into a room and sense someone's sorrow before they even smile. You hear the tremble in someone's voice and instinctively know they're holding back tears. That's not something you learn. It's something pain teaches you. It stretches your heart until it breaks, and when it finally mends, it leaves you open in a way that most people will never experience. Empathy isn't just an emotion. It becomes a part of your very being. You recognize suffering not through explanation, but through resonance. You've been in the dark, so when someone else is there, you can feel it without needing a single word. You respond differently, not with pity, but with quiet understanding. You don't rush to fix. You don't offer cliches. You simply stay present because you know how healing it is to not be alone in your pain. There's a kind of silent language between souls who've suffered. A glance, a pause, a slight nod. And in that moment, something invisible passes between them. Recognition, the knowing that says, I see you, I know this space. You're not the only one. That knowing can be more powerful than any advice ever spoken. This level of empathy often makes you seem soft in a world that celebrates hardness. But softness isn't weakness. It's clarity. You've learned that being tender in a harsh world is a revolutionary act. Atomization, you've chosen to stay open despite what's tried to close you. You don't flinch away from pain, you walk toward it when others run, not because you enjoy suffering, but because you've grown strong enough to hold it without being consumed. And perhaps the most beautiful part of it all is this: your pain hasn't made you bitter. It's made you compassionate. You don't project your wounds, you transform them into bridges. And in doing so, you become the kind of person who quietly helps others survive what nearly destroyed you. That kind of empathy doesn't come from comfort. It comes from having suffered, healed, and chosen love anyway. There's a certain kind of wisdom that doesn't come from study, instruction, or intellect. It comes only from suffering, raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal. When someone has walked through the fire of deep inner pain, they begin to see life through a different lens. Their understanding becomes more instinctual, more felt than learned. It isn't theoretical, it's lived. They don't just know things, I understand them in a way that makes others stop and listen when they speak. You can recognize this wisdom in those who no longer waste energy on what doesn't matter. They don't chase approval. They don't argue about trivial things. They've seen what it means to lose parts of themselves, to rebuild from rubble. And so they carry a clarity that others often mistake for detachment. But it's not detachment. It's discernment. When you've suffered, you stop giving your time to illusions. You start paying attention to what's real. This wisdom is often quiet. It doesn't need to announce itself. It shows up in how you respond to pain in others, in how you hold your own suffering with dignity, in how you no longer seek revenge but understanding. People might ask where you learned to speak with such truth, or how you came to see through facades so easily. But there's no simple answer. It wasn't a lesson. It was a journey. One marked by loss, silence, reckoning, and eventually awakening. You come to realize that most of the world is trapped in distraction, in ego, in fear. But you've been broken open. You've been made to look inward when everything outside fell apart. And in that inward journey, you found something priceless, your own inner authority, a compass that doesn't sway with the opinions of others, a sense of truth that doesn't need to be proven. This kind of wisdom isn't about being right. It's about being real. You've seen too much to pretend. You've suffered too deeply to stay on the surface. And now, when you speak, your words carry weight. Not because they're loud, but because they come from a place that knows. A place few people dare to go. The world doesn't often reward this kind of wisdom, but those who carry it quietly shape the souls of those around them. One of the most difficult lessons suffering teaches is the art of letting go. Not from a place of defeat, but from a place of deep inner clarity. When you've endured enough pain, there comes a moment when you realize that control is often an illusion, something we cling to when we're terrified of chaos. And suffering shatters that illusion completely. It strips away your ability to manage outcomes, predict people, or hold the world together with sheer will. And at first, that collapse feels unbearable. But strangely, over time, it becomes liberating. You begin to see that peace doesn't come from gripping tighter. It comes from loosening your hold. The more you've suffered, the more you've seen how unpredictable life truly is. People leave, plans fall apart, health fades, expectations betray us, and no matter how hard you try, some things simply cannot be changed. So you stop trying to force reality to fit your desires. You stop resisting what is, and you start flowing with life instead of fighting it. This surrender isn't passivity. It's strength. It's not giving up. It's growing up. When you stop needing to control everything, a strange kind of power rises within you. The power to accept, the power to respond rather than react, the power to walk away when something no longer aligns with your soul, without bitterness or blame. You start choosing your battles with greater wisdom, saving your energy for what truly matters. And with this surrender comes a quiet confidence. You're no longer frantically trying to bend the world to your will. You found stability inside yourself. That's why people who've suffered often appear calm, even in the midst of storms. They've already survived worse. They've already learned that resistance creates suffering, while acceptance creates space for healing. You also begin to let go of people. Not with anger, but with love. You understand that not everyone is meant to stay, and that doesn't make them wrong. It just means their part in your story is complete. You no longer beg to be understood or try to explain your worth. You let things unfold. You trust timing. You trust yourself. Because in the end, the greatest freedom comes not from controlling life, but from being at peace with what you cannot control. There is a kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't need to be put on display. It lives quietly in the background, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you endure without needing applause. Those who have suffered deeply often radiate this kind of quiet power, not because they are trying to be strong, but because they've been broken down and had no choice but to rebuild themselves from the inside out. And in doing so, they became something solid, something real, something unshakable. You've likely met someone like this, or maybe you are this person. You walk into a room and people feel something they can't quite explain. It's not charisma, it's not charm, it's presence. It's the energy of someone who has known darkness intimately and who carries that memory not as a burden, but as a source of wisdom. You don't speak to impress. You don't move to be seen. Atomization. You've stopped chasing validation because you've learned that the deepest recognition comes from within. That kind of energy doesn't need permission. It doesn't seek attention. It just is, and it calms others not by fixing their problems, but simply by being there, because people feel safe around those who have survived. You're no longer reactive. You don't get pulled into drama. You don't panic in uncertainty. Why? Because you've already lived through the worst moments and found out that you are still here. You understand that life is not about control or perfection. It's about presence. And your presence has weight, not because of what you say, but because of what you've endured without losing your heart. That is true resilience. Not the loud kind, but the kind that's rooted deep in the soul. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself because it has already passed the test. Others may not know your story. They may never see the pain you've carried or the nights you spent breaking in silence. But they feel the result of it. They feel your steadiness, your groundedness, your ability to stay centered even when everything else is falling apart. And that is the mark of someone who has truly turned suffering into strength.